Well, thank you, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, my name is Don McFarland. I am the ISR Technical Scheme Manager for the Aerospace Business Unit. Mike is on the phone, but he's asked that I participate, or excuse me, that I conduct this session for you guys today. So with that, we'll get started. The topics that we're going to discuss today are the refresh of our transition plan benchmarks, just kind of give you an update as to where we are. We'll go through some of the lessons learned, and then we'll talk about some of the optional tools associated with helping to bridge those gaps, and then we'll get into some Q&A. As you know, the chat feature on your screen is the way to connect with us because everybody's on mute. So if you would, just make sure you're typing those questions into the chat feature, and we'll get to them during that question period. So with that, let's go through our transition plan benchmarks one more time. As we know, the 2016 transition plan action items are all complete. We've moved into the 2017 benchmarks, and you can see the first one that's outstanding right now is NSF transitioning to AS9110. As previously mentioned, this was delayed based on some late release of the training materials. We do have an update. We anticipate that being done in the next week or so. So stay tuned for some more information on that. But that's really the only thing that's holding us up at this point. We are transitioned and authenticated in Oasis for 9100 and 9120. And you can see we were well ahead of the curve for that. The next benchmark here is the dreaded 6/15 date. This is the date after which all audits started need to be done to the new standards. So every audit conducted after or started after 6/15 will need to be done to the updated rep. Shouldn't be a surprise. We've gone through this every month, but that's a key deadline. You can see the other two benchmarks here associated with some risk management and risk planning activities that we have and some reporting that we have to do to our accreditation bodies. These are associated with kind of keeping tabs of industry. One of the transition lessons learned from the previous version or the previous upgrade was that the industry oversight partners were not aware of risks that existed, so now they want to keep informed along the way. So there's two benchmarks this year, and then next year there's some other reporting that I didn't include in here. Really the key date for 2018 is associated with September 15th, and that's the date that all current standards, the 9001, 2008 base standards, ride off into the sunset. So with that said, you have to have conducted your audits and corrective actions have to be closed, and certain decision at the CB have to be done well in advance of that date. So we're targeting that audits need to be really started by about conducted by about June of 2018 so that we can ensure we get everybody done and through the process. Now we know there's going to be some outliers to that, but we certainly want to try and mitigate any risks, and that's where those reporting benchmarks come into play. So stay tuned for some more information on that in our upcoming and future webinars. So that will move into the next phase of this, which is the lessons learned. And regarding the lessons learned, I've really broken it down into just a couple categories. The first one here is associated with definition. So as it says, we need to ensure that the context of our organization is clearly defined. As we know and as we preach, this is a newer requirement. It's not truly new to the standard, but the formal definition and the documentation associated is new. Prior to this, it was something that could exist in the heads of our executive team and our management team. But now there's a requirement that this has to be established and maintain documented information. So that maintain documented information, as it says here in the note, can include the description of the quality management system compiled into a single source of documented information, commonly referred to as a quality manual. So it's something we've just added some additional context to it. In particular, it says we have to have a general description of the relevant interested parties. So that's a new requirement. That wasn't a previous requirement into the quality manual. And that's probably the one that's going to be most key for this conversation, is understanding who your customers are and who the other interested parties are, because interested parties are more than just customers. They can be regulatory bodies, they can be your community, they can be your employees, they could be the scientific community at large. because everybody has an interest in what's going on, or may have an interest rather. So defining those is really important. Then you can build your system around the expectations and the needs of your interested parties, not just what you perceive your customers' needs to be. From there, you can develop a scope of the quality management system, which includes the boundaries and applicability. And as we know, applicability is the new term for exclusions. So it's gone to a positive or an inclusive type approach versus the exclusion type approach. So now we pick what's applicable and what's not applicable to our organization rather than choosing to exclude. The other items here are really not new to this as far as what the requirements are. It says the description of the processes needed for the QMS and their application, the sequence and interaction of the processes, and the assignment of responsibilities and authorities. This is somewhat new in that it has to be documented in the manual. It was something that needed to be defined, but now it's got to be captured in the manual. So for each of the processes of your organization, we need to identify who the responsible and authority, who has responsibility and authority associated with each of those processes. So again, topic number one here is surrounding the definition of the system and ensuring that we've clearly defined and articulated who we are and what we do. Topic number two is associated with execution. And really this is, we've gone through and identified a bunch of gaps exist, and we haven't necessarily executed to those gaps. There are very, very, very few technical gaps that do exist, but we still have to address them all. And as it says here, it's minimal, but all the shall statements do need to be addressed. Some of these include risk-based thinking, knowledge, KPIs, etc. So we need to make sure that we've addressed all those new deltas. Again, there's not much from a technical perspective that's changed, but we still have to ensure that all of those shalls have been addressed and that all those technical shifts have been included into the scope of the management system. I'm going to put a plug in for our resources that are available on the nsf.org website, and you can see the link there, and I'll show it to you again a couple times. But this is where all of our previous webinars are available, and this will include topics like risk-based thinking, like KPIs, like context of the organization. We've got a lot of great resources that are available to all of the clients and really anybody that wants to look at them, because our intent was just to keep everybody informed on the changes and make sure that there's no surprises as we get closer to this. So with that said, we'll move on to number three, which is the actual execution. So this is where a wonderful system was defined and architected, but a lack of execution. As we know, it's really, really easy for us to paint ourselves into a corner, and if we over-architect the system and fail to deliver, that's just as bad as failing to architect the system correctly. Something to keep in mind here, you are your own worst enemy in this case. You have a requirement to meet the standard, to meet your stakeholder requirements. And again, that's why it's so important to understand who your interested parties are and their needs and the issues surrounding your organization. And then meet those requirements. You don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need to develop anything that's, a Ferrari when a Pinto will do, so to speak. It's nice to continually improve the system, but a good system today is better than a perfect system tomorrow. And we want to make sure that we're implementing a good system now to maintain the integrity of the QMS that you've already developed. So execution is the third item here. Number four was associated with monitoring our performance. And I know for those that joined us in the KPI webinar, we hashed this out quite a bit. The standard's really big on identifying who our what our processes are and the implementation of those processes, and then we have to monitor and measure the performance of those processes. So this is what tells us not only did we do it correctly, but are we doing the correct things? And that's where defining the appropriate KPIs and objectives for our processes would be extremely important and darn near vital. The second bullet here says ensure that performance is tracked and status is known by team members. And that becomes important because now there's a knowledge requirement that says everybody's got to know the performance of their process. But guess what? That wasn't a new requirement. That's something that's always been there. What's fairly new is the interpretation of KPIs and the need for a more definitive KPI by process. So rather than using the global quality objectives of on-time delivery and customer returns for all processes, we would utilize a more process-specific KPI associated with individual activities and their contributions to the overall achievement of the quality management system. And then, obviously, if we have the data, we'd want to put it in the hands of the people that are playing the part so that they know their performance. Kind of an important concept. Again, we've got a great webinar for that. If you want more information, I'd recommend you go check that out. The next topic is on Oasis. So under the new system, under the new scheme, you as a certified client organization have some responsibilities to execute functions within Oasis. Gone are the days of the auditor and the CB handling all of that work for you and you only having to log in once a year. Now, in order to complete an audit, there's a couple signatures that you'll have to apply, one on the audit report, and then if you were to be assigned corrective actions, you've got to sign those as well, and you've got to progress through the corrective action within the Oasis database. Now, again, this is only tied to AS 9100D, 9110C, and 9120B audits, so only new generation audits, but every one of those functions has to be done within the Oasis database. And from previous webinars, you probably recall that every single report will now be direct entered into that database, so you can see our inputs in real time. Likewise, you'll get email notifications as soon as a nonconformity is created in the database, and then you as the as the client supplier administrator will be the only ones able to go in and access it. For clarity there, they have added a second tier associated with supplier permissions. So you don't necessarily have to be at a supplier administrator. You can be a supplier representative and still execute corrective actions. So what that means for you as a quality manager or quality director or quality professional, you can still maintain control over your Oasis logins and grant permission to, say, an engineering function or to a manufacturing function or whomever is going to be responsible to input the corrective action status and update. You can grant them a lower tier permission so they can't affect anything in there that's critical, but they can certainly respond to the corrective actions that they've been assigned or that they're responsible for. So it's kind of a cool development, kind of a cool progression within the Oasis database. The NCRs, once you do respond to them, the auditor has no ability to make any changes to it. So if they suggest changes, and for those that have been around, there are most occasions where there's some update or some question that needs to be clarified. So auditors are going to ask for clarification, or they're going to ask for you to reconsider the corrective action response and maybe include some additional information. The only mechanism we have as auditors to send that back to the client now, to you, is to reject it. Sounds kind of harsh, but that's the tool that they've given us. That's the button that's in there. So if we're rejecting it back to you as a client, it's because we need additional clarification or we need some modification. There is a space for the auditor to include notes associated with what they're after, what they need. So you should receive communication. And frankly, if you don't understand what the auditor's after, shoot them an email, give them a call so that we can ensure that we're not taking up too much time to log into the database, make the changes, make the corrections, and then send it back when we're making the incorrect changes. The other aspect of Oasis is the corrective action closure will go into this database. So there's a space for you as the client organization to upload your objective evidence associated with what you did. Now you can certainly do that. There's some format and size limitations as far as the files go, so you'll have to adhere to that. And the other caveat is do not put anything regulated on there. And what I mean is ITAR, EAR type information, because remember, this is a public database that's internationally administrated, so we definitely don't want to put anything sensitive or proprietary on there. If you do have some sensitive information that needs to be reviewed by the auditor as part of closure, email is probably better. or if we need to, we can schedule an on-site verification audit just to ensure that we're not disclosing anything or revealing anything that could be sensitive or in violation of contract requirements. So with that said, we'll move on. And the last one here is topic number 6. So this is the interpretation section, and one of the first bullet here says, monitor the information that's available. And I specifically cited 2 items on here. One is for Register of Monitoring Measuring Tools. The other was for information of external providers. And I mention those specifically because they've come up recently regarding clarifications that were needed from our international document reps. So for those that don't know, the language between 7.6 of AS 9100C, which was the calibrated tools or the monitoring and measuring equipment section, and the language of 7.1.5.2, which is the new calibrated tools section, changed slightly. In the old version, it said we need to have a register and we need to define the methodologies associated with calibration. Well, the wording changed innocently within the new standard under 7.1.5.2, and now it says we need to have a register that defines or contains the methodologies. So it's put a lot of people into a tailspin wondering why I have to retool my database after so many years, or why I have to pay for my third-party calibration administrator to retool their database when the standard hasn't changed supposedly. Well, we've received clarification from the sector document rep and from the international document rep. It says no, that was an unintended change, and there is no need for the database to be modified. So that's one example of clarification that's become available, and the clarification is on the FAQ page, or excuse me, on the documented information available on the IAQG homepage, and I'll show you where those deployment support materials are in just a moment. But this is a tool that I'd recommend you go check periodically, or frankly, if you have questions, this is a great place for you to look for previously defined clarifications. And then if you don't see it on there, if you have a question, use the feedback system to request information from the sector document rep yourself. The last bullet I put on there is we'd be happy to do that for you. And the reason why is it allows us to calibrate our auditors. And if we find something that's meaningful, we'll definitely share it with this entire audience rather than keeping it a deep and dirty secret. We want to make sure that everybody's keeping informed on the different topics available. And, going through this type of an exercise is something that allows us to do that, to learn lessons pretty quickly from all of our clients and share those so that we're all moving in the right direction. So the takeaways from this slide again, there's information that's available on the IAQG page, the deployment support materials, and I'll show you where that's at. So monitor that, go check it out, and then use the feedback system if you don't. And if you choose not to do the feedback system, let me know. Send me an email, and I'd be happy to investigate your particular situation, give you some feedback as to what we think, and request clarification from the sector document reps if we need to. So with that, we'll move into some of the optional tools, the optional resources that are available from NSF, and then I'll start fielding some questions. So the first optional tool I'm going to show you is from our nsf.org info ISO updates page. And if you click on the AS 9100 2016 tab here, you'll find a link to all of our webinars. You're going to find a link to our internal audit tool. You're going to find a link to a lot of stuff. The format of this verbiage has changed slightly, but the overall look of the page hasn't. You're going to go to that link. You're going to click on the AS 9100 2016. And yes, we do have information for 9110 and 9120 on that same page. So it's used as a generic placeholder for all of it. But you click on that and you can get access to all the webinars that we've done. The recorded versions are available for anybody. You can watch them at your leisure. And then we also have presentations associated, or excuse me, tools available that are free to use, no obligation, no requirement to use them, but they're certainly available for anybody that wants to. Those tools are the internal audit tool, the transition guide document that we have, the gap assessment tool, and then we've got some additional tools that we've planned out, like I mentioned in the past. And if you have ideas on things that you'd like to see or things that you think would be beneficial to your organization or to your activities, let us know. We'd be happy to investigate and see if it's worthwhile for us to develop or maybe assist you in developing. But yeah, let us know. Again, disclaimer, these are optional resources to help in the transition process, and use is definitely not required for any of them. Some additional resources are available at the IAQG site. So it's sae.org/IAQG. And then if you go to the home page there, you're going to see a couple links. And I've got a couple highlighted here. First one is the deployment support materials. So this is where you'd click on to get to the AS9100, 9110, 9120 type information. If you click on this link or this link, it'll take you to a matrices of all the different standards that are available. And then you just click on whatever standard you're interested in, and it'll give you information on clarifications, FAQs, etc. The other one here is tied just to 9100. So if you're interested in just 9100 clarification, click on that one. It'll take you right to it. And on that page, you'll have clarifications for 9100 2016, 9001 2015, and then it still has the legacy stuff for 9001 2008, or excuse me, 2009. 9100C 2009. The other tool I'll point you to on here is the Supply Chain Management Handbook, and I know you've heard me say this before, but it is an excellent resource available for free. These are white papers that are written by industry experts on any topic under the sun that you can dream up. So for those that attended our Human Factors webinar, a majority of that information came out of the Supply Chain Management Handbook, and there are several topics in there that you can go through to your heart's content and really understand the industry's expectations associated with any topic. None of it's binding, none of it's requirement, none of it's standard, but it's all great clarification as to what the industry expects and what they would like to see and how to do it, best practices, that sort of thing. So with that, our next section is regarding questions, and this is where we're going to start responding to the questions that you've typed into the chat feature, and I'll just go through those one by one. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to put on our contact information, so you're able to copy that down, or if you have any questions or needs, please feel free to send us emails offline, and we'd be happy to respond to them that way. So with that, I'm going to jump into the questions. Says, let's see, the first one, where do I find the M&M tools? So M&M tools is associated with calibrated instruments, and the standard calls them monitoring and measuring equipment. So these are your calibrated calipers or your verified calipers or whatever vernacular you choose to go with. And as I mentioned, that's going to be in section 7.6 of the 9100C or 7.1.5.2 of the 9100D. Hopefully that answers your question. Next question comes from Rob. It says, can you provide examples of KPIs or objectives for the contract review process? And I'm going to make 2 points here. One, we've got a great webinar on KPIs and KPI development, so I would really encourage you to go check that out and read through that. We've got a lot of good suggestions on different process KPIs in there that might be beneficial to you. The other thing I'll point out here is it's really dependent on what you're after, what you want to measure. The adage or the quote that which gets measured gets improved always sticks in my head when developing KPIs. So if we're interested in developing KPIs associated with the contract review process, maybe we're not successful with turning the quote around in a timely manner. It typically takes us 7 to 10 days to turn a quote, and our customers are complaining about that. So perhaps we set an objective associated with how long it takes. Or maybe it's a ratio of how effective our quote process was in terms of, you know, our margin was X, and then we built it the first time and we actually realized that margin. It's really dependent on what you're after and what you're trying to monitor, what you're trying to measure to develop the KPIs. Hopefully that answers that question, Rob. Next one comes from Sven. It says the internal audit tool. I pulled up the tool and it doesn't appear to be process-focused type of tool that the standard recommends. Is there an audit tool or structure out there that does represent to some extent a process-based audit? And Sven, that's a great question. And if you read the disclaimers that's on that tool, it actually says this is not a process tool. This is to be used as a supplement. And the intent there was to replace the 9101D OER. A lot of companies are utilizing that OER as a means to ensure a complete audit. So they use that OER as a checklist to ensure that they're hitting all the clause requirements as a part of their process audit. Now, obviously, the OER went away with revision D, 9101D, so we don't have anything associated with 9100D. So we wanted to create this tool that allows you to be more thorough with your internal audits, but the best program that I've seen, or probably the stronger programs I've seen, are definitely process-based, so they'll identify the processes. Again, from our context, we have to identify what our processes are and the sequence and interaction of those. So we understand what those processes are, and then we'll audit to the applicable clauses associated with those processes, and we can utilize this checklist as a means of doing that, ensuring that we're hitting all the shalls. Now, if you want to just use it as a once-a-year type tool, if you want to use it just as a gap assessment type tool, perfectly fine with that. Really, the intent was to provide you with a resource that's optional and available for you should you need some help in supplementing the internal audit program to ensure you're meeting the requirement that says we've got to audit against the standards requirements and our own internal requirements. Hopefully that answers your question, sir. Next question comes from Miss Jane up in Windsor. It says, is there a change to the requirement for controlled forms? In the past, any information that was completed by an employee, whether it was kept for a day or forever, had to be on a controlled form. Is this still true? Now, the requirements of the past were associated with documents. And as we know, documents could be a form, it could be a procedure, et cetera. And anything that was used by an employee to capture and retain information was a form, a controlled form that was a document, and then it would convert to a record once we started inputting information onto it. So we'd have a controlled form to ensure that we got repeatable information from the process execution. The new standard doesn't use the term document or form, it says documented information. The intent didn't change. The intent is we have the same sheet of music that we're all working to so that we're executing the process the same way. What they've done is taken away the vernacular of document, form, record, and procedure because we got too hung up on that. We got too fixated on whether it fit into section 4.2.3 or 4.2.4. The intent all along has been to do what you, or say what you intend to do it, and then have proof. And the new standard just says you're going to have documented information that says what you're going to do, and you're going to have documented information to show that it was done. So no real changes as far as what the intent was. Hopefully that answers your question, Ms. Jane. Next question comes from Ryan. It says, in regards to identifying the interested parties and maintaining that as documented information, how specific does this need to be? For example, can I keep it general and simply include regulatory authorities, or do I need to specifically say the FAA? And Ryan, I'm going to throw this one back at you and say it depends on your needs. If you're complying with FAA, EASA, Transport Canada, insert Civil Aviation Authority here, it's really going to be dependent on their specific needs as to how detailed you make this. In addition, you'd want to make it specific enough so that it's meaningful as you're developing the rest of your processes, because this is an opportunity as you're developing the interested parties list and their needs. This is a great opportunity for you to understand what do you need in your quality system, and then ensure that your quality system meets those needs. So the more generic you make the list, the less meaningful or impactful it will be later on. Now, keep in mind, this interested parties list can certainly be an iterative document, and it most likely will. We're not going to get it right from the get-go, and our interpretations are going to change, or our understandings are going to change as we mature. So it'll be important for us to continue to evolve that document as our customer base changes or our regulatory oversight processes change, or our interpretation of how this works and fits into the context of our organization changes. So kind of danced around the question, but it really depends on you and your organization. There is no specific requirement that says you have to call out the FAA level. It can be simply stated as civil aviation authorities or regulatory authorities, but it really depends on what's going to be beneficial to you. Jay asks, can you give examples of interested parties? I'm from a very small company. And Jay, I think we just talked about a couple of them, but others could include, just the community that you're in, because obviously they'll have a vested interest in your success. Or if you're emitting a large number of pollutants, there may be some consequences associated with that. So maybe the needs are associated with your footprint within the community, or the social responsibility pieces. Now, obviously, this is an aerospace standard, so we're not terribly worried about that, but it's certainly something to consider because it could impact your ability to build widgets or deliver a service. Some other examples of interested parties could be your employees, or perhaps your stakeholders, your shareholders, your organization surrounding you. All of those things could definitely be considered here. Next one from Patrick says, should we do a KPI for individual employee performance or just KPIs as a group? And that's a great, great question. Probably one of the most philosophical debates you could ever have. And I'm going to say it depends. It depends a lot on your company and your company's culture. Now, if you go watch that KPI webinar that we did, you're going to see a lot of correlation to sports, a lot of analogies to sports. And I'll just share one here. I'm a huge baseball fan. Go Rockies, by the way. And I will say it would be ineffective for me to gauge a pitcher's performance, an individual pitcher's performance, based on the win-loss ratio of the team. In particular, a starting pitcher, because they're going to rotate maybe 1 in every 4, 1 in every 5 games. They're going to actually make an appearance. So to grade their performance based on that metric would be ineffective. So you'll see in those types of situations where ERA, base on balls, strikeouts, etc., are defined by player. But on the flip side of the baseball team, we grade our overall slugging percentage or overall batting average associated with the team, and then to the individual player's performance. Same is true of our fielding percentage. So it really depends on, as a manager, what level of detail do you need? Do you want to understand it from a process context, or do you want to understand it from an individual contributor's context? Now, keep in mind here, we can really, really do some negative things to culture if we do the wrong things with this data. If we're driving the wrong indices, or if we're driving performance in a negative way, we can really destroy morale by having all of this data. And I've witnessed that in a past life. So it's important to keep the right data and then to use the data appropriately so that we're driving the right behavior or the improved behavior. One more point I want to make here is regarding the KPI performance data. It's real easy for us to not only drive the incorrect behavior, but for us to cause negative impacts. A lot of companies will implement some competition type things or incentive-based programs, and you can certainly do that, but if they're not managed well, it can really put a turn on the culture or really cause some ramifications within the culture that you may not want. There may be some unintended consequences. So before you go down that road, I would recommend you do a lot of homework. But getting back to the original question, there is no requirement to have it to the individual level, but every individual within the company needs to know the KPIs or the performance indices associated with their role. So if I don't have specific KPIs to the person, that person would need to know the KPIs associated with their department. And if they don't have department-specific or process-specific KPIs, they would need to know the KPIs associated with the company or the objectives. So we still have to keep them informed as to performance, but not necessarily individual performance, if that makes sense. So next question comes from Daniela. It says, where can I find more information related to Oasis administration? What is required as an administrator? Great question. We have a webinar for that. There's a webinar that we did on the Oasis database, and it talks to the different permissions. And frankly, the best source of information you can get is the Oasis database itself. If you haven't been in since December, you'll notice when you log in that the format has changed quite a bit. It was updated late December, and then there were some other tweaks made in mid-April. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a question mark in a box. That's the help section. Frankly, that's probably your best source of information to go to and find specifics on what you're after. They've got great slides associated with click-by-click performance for each of the different functions that you would be involved in, and you can sort by role, by administrator, by CB, etc. It's really, really powerful, really good information. So that would be the second source I would point you to. Again, it's from our Oasis webinar at the nsf.org/info/ISO-updates. Or if you go to the IAQG Oasis page, you'll see the question mark on the upper right-hand corner. Next question comes from Michael Carney. Says, is NSF expecting a large request for certification audit close to the deadline, and will it present problems? You know, I don't want to paint a picture that we're all hunky-dory, and I certainly don't want to paint a picture that we've got doom and gloom. That's why we're doing the risk assessment that we're doing, and that's why industry is forcing themselves into that risk assessment process. I can tell you that we're about 80% of our auditors have upgraded on the 9100. We've got a smaller number on the 9120, but that number is growing daily. And by June 15th, I anticipate we'll have, you know, above 80 to 90% of our auditors transition to the respective standards. Now, as you all know, no one likes to be audited during the summer and during the holidays. So we're anticipating this lull in the summer to be a great time for auditors to get caught up. And we're going to start pushing for audits to make sure we're getting everybody done in the time that they need. And then we'll monitor that as part of the risk assessment activities that we owe our accreditation bodies. And those are due Q3 and Q4, and then again in Q1 of next year, so that we can keep tabs on where our risks are and where our resource constraints will be. In addition, we're actively recruiting and have been for months to find the right auditors to bring on board to NSF. And given the size of our organization, we're certainly capable of attracting good and qualified candidates, and we've done a great job of recruiting so far. So I don't necessarily foresee problems, but my crystal ball is broken, and you know there's going to be hiccups, but we'll take them in stride, and we'll do some webinars to keep everybody informed as to what the constraints are as we come across them. Next question says, can I use the term quality in the quality policy, or do I have to use the definition of quality? And I'm going to say you can use whatever you want in the quality policy. That's your term. That's your statement of intent for your management system. So you tell us what you intend to do, what you intend to be. The requirements are that it has to address continual improvement. It has to be specific to your organization. And frankly, your employees need to know about it. They don't have to have it memorized. In fact, you'd probably think less of them if they did have it memorized when it's a lengthy article. But they have to have access to it, and they certainly have to have an understanding of it to a point where they can articulate how they help to contribute to it. And that's probably the bigger piece there. Hopefully that answers your question. Next question is NSF, sorry, got distracted here. Once I release and implement the new procedures and quality manual per 9100D, do I have to conduct an internal audit before the transition audit? Excellent question. The answer is no. You do not have to conduct a full internal audit. There is no requirement that says I have to assess my system against the new requirements. But you have to ensure that you meet the requirements. So how you do that is up to you, but you'll need to make sure that you're ready. An internal audit is a great tool, certainly one that we would recommend you have in place and execute, but there is not a definitive requirement that says thou shalt conduct a complete internal audit prior to the implementation. So If you want to do it, that's great. If not, as long as you have another means to show that you're all in and that you're all transitioned and everything is good, we're fine. It's not necessarily something that we need to see. We don't need to have tangible evidence to show that you've transitioned effectively. What we're after is ensuring that you've got, when we do the audit, we're not going to have any issues. So it's going to be in your best interest to go through some process like that to meet all the requirements. The next question says, have all the auditors passed their upgrade training? Do you see any issues from companies that will be going through the 9100D transition in the short term, especially if they are full recertification audits? And I think I've addressed part of that. You know, we've got a fairly good percentage of our resources that have transitioned, and it's something I monitor on a bi-weekly basis now. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't anticipate any huge hang-ups, any hiccups. And frankly, if your audits were impacted, you would have been notified already. Our line in the sand is if the auditor is not qualified within 60 days of the audit, there's going to be notifications for risk planning. So if you haven't received any notification from your audits or from your audit manager, your scheduler, or the auditor themselves to say, hey, I'm not ready, there's a chance that the audit may be impacted, then you're in good shape for now. We're doing a lot of activity, as I already described, to try to manage that and to try and ensure that we're going to keep ourselves in a good position there. But it's certainly something that I'm not terribly worried about right now. The next question says, will employee awareness of ethical behavior satisfy the requirement for objective evidence, or this will require documented training and or policy? No documented policy is needed. You simply have to have some way of showing that employees are aware of it, whether it's incorporated into their baseline competency or if it's just something that you've discussed. Because the standard just says that they have to have knowledge of the importance of ethical behavior. It doesn't say it has to be demonstrated competency. So it's something that as an auditor I'm going to perhaps ask an employee, certainly not every employee, but ask, how do you understand, or what knowledge do you have of that type of information? And we'll see what they say. If I get the deer in the headlights look, obviously I'll be a little concerned. We'll certainly phrase it into the local vernacular, making sure we're speaking your language. But we definitely want to see some indication that the employees of the organization understand ethical behavior and the importance thereof. Brent says, can I use the QMS matrix and pair as supporting documents for recording objective evidence for internal audits? Great question, Brent. The answer is absolutely. They are great tools to capture the processes and the process information associated with your internal audit activity. And then, frankly, if you've got inexperienced auditors or if you want to just ensure a complete audit, that's where that internal audit checklist would become beneficial. So you use the PAIR, the Process Effectiveness Assessment Report, as a means to record the inputs, activities, and outputs of the process along with the evidence you looked at. And then you could use the matrix to show the clause alignment to that pair, and then supplement that with the internal audit tool so that you've got all of the clauses addressed and objective evidence associated with each of those clauses, and you can demonstrate a complete and thorough audit, not necessarily to us, but to your stakeholders, because ultimately what matters is your internal audit process is going to be a lot more productive than we are. You know where the skeletons are buried. So if you've got a good and robust process and you're demonstrating that to your internal parties, they're going to have greater confidence in the effectiveness of the QMS. Next question is from Ryan. It says, so far I have only raised awareness during internal audits, and that is documented, but I don't have anything specific defined for ethical behavior. So this is a follow-on to the previous question. And I mean, frankly, any methodology that you use to raise that awareness is going to be just fine. Whether it's a group training session, buy the guys donuts and, sit around and talk about it, or just do a more formal meeting. Really, the only time that you need to have something documented is for I can't think of the FAR clause reference, but there are some FAR clauses that are going to require training on ethical behavior, and if it's over a certain dollar threshold, you're going to have to you have to have evidence of it. But for the small organization, you're probably not going to meet those dollar thresholds, and you're probably not going to have issues with a more informal training methodology or awareness methodology for the knowledge-based requirements. There is no need at this point for specific training records associated with it. So looks like we got one more question. We'll give everybody just a minute to type in any additional questions that you have. But one additional question here comes from Patrick. Says, do I need any special training to train my internal auditors to perform audits on the new standard? Patrick, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. Short answer is no. You have to define competency associated with the role of an internal auditor. Now, that competency may include specific audit performance or on-the-job training with a qualified auditor. It may include a third-party credential or a third-party certification. It may include just a lead auditor training that's approved or accredited. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide what the definition of competency is. And when they're performing that role, they have to be competent to perform the role, and that role would be that of an internal auditor, but they have to have competency. Now, I would challenge you to try to think of how a person auditing to a new standard, a totally new standard, could demonstrate competency, or what required competency you would have to ensure that they're adequately performing in that role. And what I mean by that is, you've got auditor skills and you've been trained on auditing skills, but the requirements of AS9100C and AS9100D are slightly different. I equate this to if I'm an AS9100 auditor, it doesn't mean that I can go audit to medical device standards because it's a different set of requirements. And albeit this set of requirements is very minimal as far as the changes go, but it's still different. So having some method to show that the update has been done would be definitely beneficial, not for compliance to us, but to ensure that you're getting the most out of those internal audits. Because again, these auditors are the eyes and the ears of your organization. They're the ones that are going out and finding the problems before they manifest into customer complaints or into third-party audit nonconformities or regulatory nonconformities. So we'd want to give them every tool we could to make them successful. And whether that includes, some internal coursework on the changes, frankly, we sit them all down in the conference room and go through it. That's good enough. Or if you want to send them out to a more formalized training, that's perfectly fine too. So I spoke out of both sides of my mouth there. The standard does not require an update training for your auditors, but I'm asking, why wouldn't you want to do that to make sure that they're productive in conducting those internal audits to the new requirements? Any opportunity you can give those guys to be trained and competent, more competent in that task, is probably beneficial to you as an organization and to you as a stakeholder in that organization. So I would certainly encourage you to consider it at least. So with that, I think that's about all the questions we have. Again, on behalf of NSF and Mike and me, I want to make sure that you all understand how much we appreciate you attending these webinars. We do it for the benefit of you, the clients, and ensuring that you're calibrated with our expectations and that our auditors are going to be able to conduct the audit for you without having to write nonconformities, trivial nonconformities associated with some of these requirements, these new requirements. We want to make sure that clients are educated on some of the changes so that, frankly, you've had a chance to be successful and implement these without having us waving the big stick of a nonconformity, because that really doesn't benefit us or benefit you. Really what we're after is ensuring conformity in the supply chain of the aerospace industry, and the more training we can provide to you to do that, the better off we're all going to be. So thanks for watching. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch you next time.